I think so.
It's the 28th.
Yeah.
It's the 28th of August of 2012. I'm in the Media Center, which is what they call a library now,
Yes.
at the Ephrata High School with Mrs. Jane
Englert.
Who is, what's your official position there?
Well, this school year I actually am working in a new capacity. I'm called a technology coach.
Okay.
And my responsibility will be to work with teachers to bring technology into their classrooms as a way of
Now, there are
enhancing.
computers in all the classrooms now?
Well, all of the teachers definitely have computers in their classroom.
Yeah, there.
Right. They
Because that's roll keeping and all the
right.
stuff.
Otherwise, they would have access to either mobile carts of computers that
Okay.
they can schedule to bring into their classroom, or they can schedule a lab or come to the media center.
Is there Wi-Fi throughout,
Yes,
throughout the building?
yeah.
So if I wanted to do a research project with my kids and I wanted laptops, you could roll them in and they could go right to work.
Absolutely correct.
That's neat. That is really,
Absolutely
now,
correct.
Of the kids that you deal with, how many of them have their own devices, like iPads or the fancy Nooks or something
Yeah.
like that? That they can
You know, statistically, I can't answer that precisely, but I would bet you that almost every student, I mean, if I were guessing, I'd say 85% of the students have devices, whether
Sure.
it's just a cell phone or something a
Oh
little
yeah,
bit
cell
more.
phone. That's right. You
Right.
can still get on the internet. You could do a little
Right.
research on that.
Right. So I would think,
And they're permissible in the school.
students do bring their devices to school with them. There are times during the day when they may not use them.
Turn them off.
Right. They have to be out of sight, yes.
And as a teacher, is that my decision?
This year, they're allowing use of devices under specific direction of a curricular nature.
Okay.
So, in other words, sometimes you can use a cell phone for like a survey.
Okay.
So, again, and that's totally at the teacher's discretion.
And that's real. That's what's happening out there in,
Yep.
in reality. Where's home? Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Allentown, Pennsylvania.
Oh, I know
Yep.
where Allentown
Yep.
is.
I
And
grew up
where'd
in
you go to
Allen-
school?
I went to school in Allentown Central Catholic.
Okay.
And then it took me a while to decide what I wanted to be when I grew up.
Uh-huh.
But at some point in my 30s, I decided that I wanted to be a librarian.
And you went where?
Kutztown University.
Okay, good.
So my
Library.
undergrad is Kutztown.
And where's your graduate work?
My graduate work is through Wilkes University.
Okay.
I
took a
have
couple of courses from them.
master's in education with a concentration in classroom technology.
Okay, so you are, it was your undergraduate library?
Library science, yeah.
Okay, and then you went to the technology
Yep.
end. In your professional practice, is there some core belief that drives you daily, upon which you base your practice?
You know what, I did think about that question a little bit because you had, sent it to us early on. And I actually did write a few things down, but, what I absolutely love about what it is that I do is every day I walk through the door, there is hope for something good to happen. It's amazing, especially working with this age student, with a high school student. So often they have their entire lives ahead of them, and they are so full of life, I guess is a good way to put it, that being around them makes me feel alive. So
I always felt like a young man in the classroom. I mean, it is vitalizing. It does fill you. If someone were to come to you and say, one of the things I did when I taught electricians, okay, and I would say, okay, now guys, we have to go from here to there. It's 76.5 feet. How many pieces of conduit do we need? And they'd all reach for their calculators.
yeah.
Which is, the piece of conduit is 10 feet long,
Right,
you need
right.
7.5. And I say, what the thing?
Right.
You've got to do this math in your
Right.
head. If I were to say, look, all this technology is fine, but what if you're in a situation like I was in when I was in Africa, where where there was no electricity, there was no plumbing, there was no Wi-Fi, there was no, I mean, we were a mile and a half from the closest dirt road, and technology wasn't worth a diddly. Are you doing the kids a favor by making them totally technology dependent.
No, you know what? Here's the way I approach it, though. Okay, I don't see my role as teaching technology. Okay, because technology is a tool. All right. So technology of and by itself doesn't count for a whole lot. I see my goal as teaching people how to think. Okay. So in the process of doing that, using information, manipulating information, all right, that's something that you need to think about, you need to problem solve and whatnot. So getting back to your question, I think what you're trying to ask me is, because students are maybe not as proficient with using maybe a print material or being able to calculate in their heads, is that a hindrance to them should they find themselves in a situation? And what I would probably say is, as with any tool, is with any time something happens and a tool changes how you approach it, I think what's important is to prepare them for what we see is coming.
What the real world is.
Right. And with that being said, teaching them, first of all, to be self-reliant and to think, so the thinking has to come first, all right? They have to be able to, look at a situation and assess it in some way. If they use a tool then to solve it, well, so be it,
But, it concerned me, again, to use the analogy of my experience in Africa, there were two groups of us over there. Those of us over 45 who might have had a cell phone but left at home, and those of us under who had to have one in their hand all the time.
Right.
I got the idea that the concept of complete solitude was repugnant. Is this good? I mean, dealing with... Must I always be looking at a screen? Must I always be entertained?
See, I tend, because I would probably be more of the mindset of someone who grew up and emerged through the majority of my life to this point without having access to so much technology. So I often, where I would see it, if I was going to bring it to the table, I would see kids often with earbuds in, so they don't necessarily talk to each other, or even the act of talking to each other is done through their fingers rather than, or that instantaneous gratification kind of thing. To be honest with you, it is of concern, but it is so pervasive in their lives that
our part of our job is to challenge the pervasive.
I think we have to find a way to make both worlds coexist in some way. Yes, I do believe that part of what we're doing here in school does require us to put those devices away, which is what happens during at least their individual personal devices. Okay.
In their pocket. Right.
Now, using the tool to maybe type or something like that.
That's understood.
Maybe something a little different. I don't know that I know the answer for that. I struggle with that, and I concur with you, actually.
Because I find with myself, I can get into something like that, and then the creativity goes away. If I want to be creative, I need to get that stuff out of my way, so that I'm thinking. I might be doing something rote with my hands, like I work with wood or something like that. But the mind, or go for a walk, and the mind is working. But if I'm at a computer, oftentimes that's where I put the creative process down. But the creative process has to happen somewhere else.
Well, again, I think there's arguments for both ways, and I think partially it depends on maybe how you've evolved through the process. But very interestingly, today in several classes that I worked with, these were 11th grade students, and what we did was something that focused on their learning style and their motivation style. And this was something done with paper and pencil. It was not done, using technology. And interestingly enough, they had not all thought about themselves from that perspective. Some students, have experienced those type of survey questions before and, had an idea of what their strengths were. But what was interesting again was that sort of self-reflection where, you know, based on their results, they had a chance to look at themselves, and then the conversation was, okay, great, if you are strong in something and weaker in something else, do you anticipate at some point in time you will need to produce a product or, you know, function under this other capacity? And the answer was yes, of course. You know, so even though I'm a visual learner, there may be times when I need to do something tactile, okay? Sure. And the question back to them then was, okay, well, what's your plan? How are you going to, you know, attack that kind of thing? And interestingly enough, you know, they hadn't always thought about it like that. So getting them to think about themselves, I think, helps them to realize.
I think that's the kind of thing we need to work on.
And that, you know, again, that is something where part of what we teach, you know, does dance around this plethora of technology that is, you know, everywhere, to be honest with you. Cars.
Basic. It's everywhere.
You know, everywhere, you know. But taking the time today, and it was also interestingly quiet in the classroom, because I think it was actually something that was unique to them.
So writing with a pencil was something different.
And even the questions, you know, even, you know, the way that the questions were framed, that it wasn't about them, it was something that was for them in a way, you know. I mean, that's at least how I saw the results, you know, that it wasn't just answering questions that were details about them, you know, or details that were like someone else would use it. This was something that hopefully, you know, our conversation after it was all over was that even if we planted a seed today, you know, if they can walk out of there and say, hey, you know what, I'm a visual learner, but I can, or some students said, I can use my strengths as a visual learner to supplement, you know, if I had a weakness in you know, in tactile or in you know, auditory.
What specific curriculum was this in?
This was in chemistry class, actually.
Chemistry class?
Yeah, we did this in chemistry class today.
Now that's interesting, because that's the kind of thing you'd look at a psychology class or even an English class.
And maybe if they do take psych in high school here or beyond, you know, they'll experience that. But this is something that the content area teacher, Mrs. Freiberger, and myself have worked on. So we want the students actually to be more reflective of their own learning. Another piece of it was, oftentimes, at least this is my opinion, students walk in and they expect something to be done to them, given to them, and part of our goal was saying, it's yours, you know. It's what you have the power to do with it. So again, getting them to think about who they are and their strengths. And we were talking about transference. We were very curious if these kids will take how they see themselves into other courses.
Have you any way of testing that?
You know what? Not so far, but I'm dealing with 11th graders, so if there's a way to kind of,
you might be able to develop.
Yeah, and we also talked about even doing, like, again, this was kind of cool. We hadn't thought about it beforehand, but the students, when they had their strengths, so there was 3 categories, and you know, we you know, put them into their strong categories. We said down the road, depending on the coursework and the projects, that there may be times when they want to align with people who think similarly, and align with people, maybe there would be benefits
where
to
they
bringing,
complement each other.
Right. So, you know, and this was something we hadn't anticipated, and yet I would like to throw it out there to say, you know, hey, we have this problem to solve. So what would be the best way for us to work together to get there? You know, so I'm now that's cool.
That's exciting.
And that's what I get up for every day. So, you know, you asked me like what that first question was. That's why I show up every day, because it's real, you know.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.